Well, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We're doing it a little bit differently this week, as we're doing lots of things differently as we find ourselves in this time of physical distancing. We're still socially connecting in multiple ways, but we wanted to offer this opportunity to talk about this next chapter in our Lenten study of the Grace of Les Miserables by Pastor Matt Rawle. And the focus this week is on what he identifies as a main character in the book and in the musical, which is the character of poverty itself and how that affects all of the main characters in some different ways. And so we're having a little panel discussion. You'll see we're appropriately spaced apart, but we wanted to invite a special guest in with us. So she's been a part of our study all through the last couple of weeks. But Katie Sumner, she's a teacher over at the Middle School of English, and she, among the three of us, is the only one who has actually read the 1,400-page novel by Victor Hugo himself, upon which the musical was based. And so she brings so much more perspective to our conversations about the musical. I can't believe that the musical and the movie is different from the book, but that seems to be the case here. So she kind of helps us with some of those differences and exploring what differences those differences may make and how we understand some of the characters. So it's a joy to be together in this way, and we hope that you are able to enter into the spirit of this conversation. And we would love to hear some of your questions or comments or observations, which you can post when this video is posted. You can post those, and we will be glad to read and review those and try to respond to those as best we can.
The man she's with, I can't remember.
Felix,
I think is his name. We're together like 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the child is born in those 3 years. He even knows the child. It's not as if, like the musical has it, she says we spent a summer together and you were gone in the fall. But they were really together for 3 years when he up and leaves her with this like Dear John letter. So there's two thoughts of that. There's also this thing during this time period. Hugo does it, Tolstoy does it, Poe does it, there's somebody else. And it's called the romantic prostitute, or the virginal prostitute. And it's where all these women have been driven into this life. None of them want it. They resent it. It's not a choice. And that was a common thing that was being written about at this time period. And that's where her character comes out of, for Victor Hugo. He also was living in Paris at the time of writing this. And so a lot of the characters were people he saw every day on the streets. And he basically would imagine their scenarios. So I think that's interesting too. And then the musical does something, you're talking about the Thenardis and Gavroche. He is actually their son in the novel, and that's different than the musical. It's ambiguous who the parent is in the musical, and I don't know why they choose to do that. But in the novel, I think one of the saddest scenes for me is the Thenardis are packing up their inn. They've been kicked out. They're moving on. They'll eventually end up in Paris. But they try to leave him behind. They tell him to go play and try to leave him. And then, the man who's basically kicking them out is like, here's your kid. And they're like, oh, we almost forgot you.
Wow.
Yeah. So it shows you how horrible of people Victor Hugo tried to make them. And I guess one of the things that I find interesting with talking about this love and justice concept is they're the people that you wondered, can God redeem everyone?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things I always see with them, can you sink so far that you even don't get redemption? Because every time they turn around, it gets worse. It never gets better in their character.
Yeah, the only good that they seem to do, according to Matt Rawle, is unknowingly clears the air between Darius and John at the end.
Yeah. Sort of that unintentional, and then he draws in that from the end of Genesis where Joseph says to his brothers, what you intended for evil, God
made good.
Good. And so, what he did in the end was redeemed, but you do still wonder who he is. That soul, is he redeemable? Is there anyone who's not redeemable, or is redemption a matter of maybe claiming that in some way? It's offered to us, and it might have been offered to him, but just the way he continued to live his life, maybe continue to resist that. It's a great question.
I know that's the thing. Spiritually, as I was looking at this and thinking about it, I was he just represents to me that as a Christian, we want to believe everyone has, this worth, this sense of saving, that they can be saved. But the more you saw this character, it's oh my gosh, can you really be saved? But to think even this man who gets, he beats a child, he sells her, he tries to lose his own children, he murders, he assaults, he has his own child kick out a window in their house with their bare hands so he can look poorer. There's nothing that he doesn't do, and you still think you are savable. Makes you feel better about your own self.
I do. So it was interesting to learn that Gavroche was his son in the actual novel, but also that Eponine, that her, I think, change in her spirit, particularly toward Cosette and Marius, and giving of her life in the end in that way, that sort of self-sacrifice. I don't know. Maybe she was able to rise above her parentage, and showed herself capable of some unexpected acts of giving, generosity.
Now, the one you see in the musical and the one you see in the book are two very different girls.
Mm-hmm.
Eponine in the musical is very, it's just an unrequited love. She's a good person. She's trying. She's fighting for a cause that she believes in. But the one in the novel is a product of her environment. She very much, she was a child that they did give her everything as a small child, especially when you portray her against Cosette. She was pampered. She was given, dolls, dresses, things like that. And then the tables turn, and basically for the rest of the novel, she's in what we would have considered a nightshirt at that time, like just a plain skirt. She lives with her parents and kind of this humble thing, and she is next door to Marius in this boarding house that they're all living in, and she is just as bad as her parents. She's stealing money from people. She's writing letters to people who have money. They're basically blackmailing them or just getting them to come look at their hovel of a home and give them money. She uses people. And even when she goes to fight for the cause, her hope is that she and Marius die together so he can't be with Cosette. Now, she ends up ultimately saving him, but her hope was that they died together.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a lot of redeemable stuff. Now, she does tell Marius where Cosette lives, but she does it because he tells her he'd give her anything she wants. What she's wanting is him to love her. He is a guy who doesn't figure that out well. So she's not as redeemable as
interesting.
the musical. The musical just gives her these really great qualities that you would
Mm.
hope this girl finds. But in the novel, she is truly a product of her environment. And it becomes, if you're not taught right from wrong, do you know right from wrong?
Yeah. That's interesting.
Or does poverty make people, I think one of the things we have to look at too is, does poverty make people sin?
Yeah, he talks about that in the book. The story of Samuel is kind of tells where that woman who is a prostitute, there's a priest nearby that realizes she doesn't have any furniture, and he's working with these guys who are out of prison. They're building furniture, and he realizes she didn't have any, so they were going to build her some and give it to her. And they show up to her house, and she's not there. So they break in to her home and give the furniture. But yeah, I think that's interesting because you've got Jean Valjean, who in poverty commits this sin. You know, what we would consider he steals bread, but he's doing it for good reasons. But what choice do you have when you don't have food? You either don't eat or you steal bread.
So 1832, France, there are no jobs. You
Yeah.
know, there is no anything really, except for this wealthy Cartesian class. So you have this sense of they have to steal to eat. You know, they have to do what they can to survive and survive the street urchin life. You know, and is it a sin? You have Fantine trying to pay for a child she thinks is sick because that's what they keep writing to her. So she chooses this life of sin. I mean, she even cuts off her hair. She has her teeth pulled out of her head. She gives everything she can to pay for a child. So it's one of those, I think that they're also trying to look at the sin of poverty. And if we don't help, does it create this sense of sin?
Matt Rawle, he kind of, in his book, seemed to suggest to me these different characters respond to the situation of poverty differently. In some, it just, like the Thénardiers, it just continues to be a cycle of selfishness and greed that they never really break out of. For Jean Valjean, it's gives some opportunities to act nobly, like not just stealing the bread to feed some of his family, but also when he was over the factory, doing the best he can for his workers. Some of the generosity that he shows, I think with Gavroche as well. Some of his sort of scrappy generosity. So I thought that was interesting. I didn't know if that was the case in the novel as well, that there's poverty is kind of can draw different things out of different people, or if it's like uniformly deadening, because for Fantine, it obviously it destroyed her and took her from a life of this freewheeling kind of middle class existence to what you just said. I mean, she was utterly destroyed by it. So is it sort of multivalent in the novel, or is it pretty much uniformly bleak and?
I don't. He did call them Les Miserables.
Yeah, that's true.
and I think that's the point. Now you have good things come out of these situations of poverty, but even for Valjean, even when he tries to come out of it, something bad will happen. It's like it's a cycle, and I think that's what he was trying to show, especially for this revolution he witnesses firsthand. Is the cycle of poverty is going to create this every time unless we step in and help. And I think that was his sense. Like he had the priests helping, the nuns helping, the Gavroche even helps little other street urchins find food. So I think it becomes, you're still going to have this cycle unless you find a way to break people out of it. And this was also his response to what he was seeing in France with this revolution. There were no jobs. There's not, for this lower class. And so it becomes, there's no, they don't have a say. They felt like at this time, especially with General Lamarck dying. So, when you feel like you have no help, do you keep doing the same thing, or, what happens to you?
I think it's really interesting too with everything that's going on right now and a lot of the economic concerns of folks, not just watching the stock market and that kind of thing, but how the quarantining and physical distancing is affecting people's jobs, is affecting their paychecks. I think there's a lot of economic anxiety in our world and in our community, and I'm wondering how he characterizes poverty as the sort of one of the main characters here, one of the situations. How that speaks to us, nearly 200 years later in the situation where we find ourselves. I mean, would he also sort of would this book suggest that we might find generosity and assistance in maybe some unexpected places from some unexpected people? Is that something we can kind of take from this? Or what are some of the things we can draw as we kind of connect the lessons of this focus over on into today?
I think that's great. We're all going to have to step up and help, whether it's buying gift cards from like small restaurants here in town that are, not chain style restaurants, or checking on people just to make sure they're okay and they have food. We're at a point, I'm really concerned about people that are part-time workers, or people that aren't true salary for hours. This is going to affect people. And so I think it becomes, we, the church, how do we help? How do we step up? And I think there's going to be a lot of things that we don't even think about just yet that are going to reveal themselves during this time period. But I have loved, I think one of the most beautiful things that has happened out of all this social distancing is the way that we're not social distancing. Like my children and I watched a thing from the Cincinnati Zoo today. We wouldn't have ever gotten to see that if this hadn't happened. We watched Pam Thigpen has played a different musical instrument and introduced it to my kids with a fun song.
Yeah.
That would probably have never happened. We took a ballet class with Kelly today from the Art Center. So I think even though we're social distancing, we're doing a great job to make sure we're still being social and we're taking care of each other. I've seen more of that happen than I think in a long time. And maybe this is God's way of saying slow down and look out for each other.
Yeah.
Look out for your fellow man.
Right. There's been a lot more intentionality about that.
Yeah.
And some more time to do that, maybe.
Even with the both of you, I appreciate you have followed your devotions each day. There's been something, there are things to look forward to. And I think that becomes important in giving people hope. And I think that was part of the message in the novel. When there was no hope, those people don't get out of the situation. But when there was hope or something to live for, love, another person, a sense of God, they could. So I think hope is the most important thing we can give each other right now.
I think even in Fontine's story, obviously her life is completely wrecked by poverty, but she still has a hope that Jean Valjean is going to care for her child, which ultimately is the thing that she cares most about. So even in like the darkest, time, she's able to find that glimmer of hope in just knowing that her daughter's going to be taken care of. And it's interesting to see how each character is affected by poverty, but how each character handles it and deals with it and ultimately responds to it. And we see that in different ways each time. So that was kind of interesting to see how folks handled that. And I think, like you said, this is maybe an opportunity for us to handle things with hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if everybody has not read the book, PBS has a great special that they did that is truly the novel.
Right.
If you wanted to go back and watch it. One of the things that I really liked that PBS did with it, though, is in the book, Fontaine cuts her hair off, all of it, to sell. And the man that takes her hair is then the same man who he makes dolls for children. And the doll that Jean Valjean buys for Cosette is Fontaine's hair.
Wow.
So
Does he know that, or is it
No,
completely?
he has no
Wow,
idea.
that's neat.
He just picks it because it does look like Fontaine a little bit when you
Yeah.
look at her, because of course it has her hair. And I don't know if they meant like the doll to even look like her, but he picks that one and takes it to Cosette. And she names it Catherine, and like she loves Catherine, and it's the first doll she's ever owned, and so it's a really sweet moment that. PBS kind of took something and played with it to make that scene, but it was really neat.
It's kind of a harebrained idea.
It was, but I liked that idea. It was just a neat.
That's sweet. A neat little touch.
Cool.
It was a neat little touch that I thought was interesting that they did.
That's cool.
So I kind of, I don't know, even in like a sense that she wasn't with her, she was with her, and it was touching. So I think, and I guess that's another fear I have as a teacher. I know people are like, oh, yeah, we're off. Well, yeah, but I'm sitting at home worried about so many of these kids and their physical and their mental states of being at home, and just like little Cosette, you worried. So that's a big fear right now for everybody too. And how do we make sure those children are okay?
I've been very impressed with how this community has really risen up during this period of time. With the YMCA providing the breakfasts and lunches, Nourish One Child for this church is still going to respond to the city school needs. And so different ways that the churches are trying to support what the scripture, and I think that he talks about in here, is that famous vision in the end of Matthew chapter 25, which is, what are we doing for the sick, the hungry, the naked, those who are in prison, the really vulnerable, I guess the miserables in our society. How are we coming together for those who find themselves in situations of poverty? Whether that's explicable or not, whether it's attributable to decisions that they may have made in their lives or not, and we see both of those. I think in the book we see those in life, and I think in the book, in the study book, he talks about how, at least the musical version really challenges that idea of you reap what you sow, like we get what we deserve. That's not always the case, but that however we find ourselves in this, we are, in a sense, and I think one of the things we're learning in this coronavirus thing is we are all in this together. And so we have opportunities, and we could just as easily be in any of those role reversals, and so we just help one another out and do whatever we can. So that is a word, I think, of hope for us and what we can do in our day and time.
I would like to think God is proud of us right now with all that we've done and all we continue to do, I would like to think that he's happy with his children at the moment. I hope so. Valid.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to think of others instead of yourself in a very real, tangible way of how we view this and how we respond to this, how we heed the warnings. Allie, my fiance, is not having her commencement or graduation, and she's sad by that. But she's also like, I get it. This is way more important. People's lives are at stake here. So I think it's an opportunity for us to just say, all right, let's put some things in perspective and realize that it's an opportunity to look toward other people as well.
I think one of the best memes I've seen though is like, I was planning on giving up some stuff for Lent. I just didn't know it was going to be this much.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think any Crouch did.
Yeah,
Like,
that's good.
We weren't prepared for this.
Yeah, I was like,
uh, giving up. So
It's true.
So I think that's kind of where everybody's at. I didn't know it was going to be this. But I hope for everyone it's a good time to reconnect. I know even with my team we're doing more devotions with each other and talking about it. And I guess the best words I've gotten were Carl Mason we were talking, he goes, God can do this. He can kill this thing. It's fine.
Wow.
And I was like, when he talks about the faith of a child,
Yeah.
that's where we're all supposed to be at.
Absolutely. I love it.
So that was his wise words, John.
It's a good word. It's a good word. Anything else that we want to touch base on?
Oh, I needed to say this because I got an email. The St. Mark's is still doing the Love Period project, and they're still passing those out during this time period and trying to connect them like we are Nourish One Child with the schools and that sort of thing. But they have run out.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are out and about or able to get out, and you can deliver some to the church because they are taking shifts packing them. So there's not a bunch there at one time. So if you can deliver them to St. Mark's, they would greatly appreciate that. That's a need I saw.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great program.
Absolutely.
So that way there's something we can do to help.
Mhm.